why and how a structure from abroad or a personal investment or an investment by a company locally has to be structured in order to be successful. The first way, of course, is by way of a subsidiary going from locally to abroad. You decide that you would want to create a company abroad because you might want to purchase technology, some kind of information you might want to expand into the market. There might be some technology you want to purchase, or you might want to get some know-how into the company, and therefore it's important to be in that jurisdiction where you can employ people who have that knowledge. There are many other reasons. Usually they are guided by monetary reason to get your money out and to be able to invest it abroad, where maybe interest rates are not as high as in India, but it's perceived to be a safe environment, politically speaking and economically speaking. So it's by way of subsidiary, by way of a branch office, and maybe by way of a liaison's office. All of those different methods have to be guided by the objective. What is the investor or what's the company wanting to go abroad? What do they want to achieve in the long term? And what is it that they want to achieve usually is obviously maximum profitability or maximum returns. But sometimes they also want to just create as far-reaching arms as possible, as I said, in order to have a technology transfer or in order to have access to excuse me? Oh no. You are allowed to ask questions. I have not a problem at all with that. Anyway, so by way of subsidiary, branch office, liaison's office, all that probably is very simple to you. And it is actually quite simple for us because in England we're allowed to open a company anywhere in the world and there are hardly any restrictions. Here, there are restrictions, there are policies that are put in place as of '91, and it is not difficult, but it's cumbersome. It's cumbersome, and there are regulations you have to abide by, and as long as you do abide by those regulations, then the investment abroad is an easy one. So what happens? You have to consider whether you want to have dividends as a return, whether you want to reduce your tax liability in India as much as possible, because clearly if you have a high expense in India, you're diverting some of your capital or you capitalize into a subsidiary abroad. That would be seen as an expense. Then if you maybe pass a loan to that company to increase its knowledge base, if you then pay interest, or if you get interest back on that, clearly there would be a benefit in terms of the tax liability locally. So there is an advantage there. But as I said, all these things have to be structured, whether you're bringing interest back, capital gains back, or whatever it is that you want to bring back, you have to abide by the rules and regulations. The best, one thing I did actually forget was about talking about maybe a hybrid kind of a return of capital whereby you use debt and equity participation both together in order to structure what you especially want to have when you come back. And thinking obviously long term, you must do these things because companies don't think for 1 or 2 years. They think we want to organize ourselves for 5, 6, 7, 10, even 20 years. Anyway, what I would like to do maybe in order to bring it a bit closer to you is maybe to discuss with you a situation which I have come across in the recent months, and that is a situation whereby a local company wished to purchase a company in Germany, a waste power plant or a waste power plant producer in Germany. The reason why they want to do it is very clear, that their technology doesn't exist in India, and there's a lot of towns here in India which think that it's an important thing to think of, and the more forward-thinking the town is or the municipality, the more inclined they would be to think about such kind of a venture. So what did they do? They had to structure some kind of a method of how to create the willingness of the RBI and all the various regulatory authorities to allow this, because there was going to be a lot of capital transfer. And the route they chose was the route of Mauritius. And I believe a lot of you probably have heard about using the Mauritius route because it's a very well-known route. In recent times, you think about 9 months ago, there was a court case. It was the Vodafone court case. I would imagine many people of you have heard of it. But it was a disaster because an investment was made, a company was transferred, and then the income tax authority said, we want you to pay 54 million back in tax because what you've done is not correct. You've got a Cayman company as a holding company, and then you decided to sell the shares in the Cayman company into an Indian company, and therefore the capital gains should be taxed locally, even though it's a foreign company. So even though there was a corporate deal between those two entities, the income tax authority didn't allow for it, and therefore they had to pay. Now, if they would have been my clients, this wouldn't have happened. I would have chosen a different route for them, and I would have made sure that what we would do would be in keeping with what the Indian authorities allow us to do. And it is a very simple one. There are treaty arrangements in place. The majority of them are obviously with the higher tax jurisdictions like France and Germany and the UK and America. But there's also a very good treaty in place with places like Cyprus, Mauritius, and Malta. UK can be used in a different way by having maybe another holding company above it. And those are protected by the Indian government. So as long as the treaties are in place, you are permitted to use those routes, and those routes are accepted. In fact, they are protected by the government, and they will be protected until they decide that it doesn't make any sense anymore. Which brings it back to common sense. The policymakers make decisions on a large scale. They don't make decisions on whether the income tax authority will make a big deal by saying you have to pay 55 million more like they did in the Vodafone case. No, they see the larger picture. The larger picture is that India does need people abroad feel safe to invest here, as well as people locally here have to feel safe to invest abroad. And it's not anymore that small companies can do this, or large companies like Tata and Reliance who've been doing it for 20, 30 years. But now you have small and medium-sized companies doing it too, seeking and getting the same protection under those treaty arrangements. Now, if anybody wants to ask me any questions with regard to those treaty arrangements, I'd be happy to answer those. Okay. Well, what I would maybe then point out, which would be a typical scenario of what a structure would be like, would be a SPV. An SPV is a special vehicle, and usually the SPV would be in a jurisdiction that either has transparent taxation in place or has this treaty arrangement with India in place. Now, when do you use an SPV? An SPV is if a company decides, like, well, I don't want to take any names because otherwise I might be drawing on a name I shouldn't be mentioning. But let's, for example, assume that a local small aircraft operator decides that the component they need to produce can't be produced locally because there's some know-how they need, and they would either have to fly a team of 10 engineers over here and give them the same amount of salary they would receive when they would, for example, live in France, and that doesn't make any sense. So what they do, they shift their operation into a different jurisdiction, and then would have a subsidiary in that jurisdiction to do the actual production. But it would work in a scenario whereby there would be a subsidiary working with a holding company above it, and the exchange of information, the exchange of technology, and very often also the resources would be provided by the local Indian company. They would be shipping it out there. They would make sure that whatever they can bring in from India, they can, and whatever technology has to be obtained from over there, they do. And they keep it there for 2-3 years until they've trained enough people up to that standard. It usually takes, in very complicated complex of engineering, it usually takes 2, 3, 4, 5 years for a good team to be ready to come back to India then. Therefore, there was a technology transfer. They could continue producing, they could continue making profits, they could continue bringing dividends back into the country. At the same time, they had the way and the method of actually increasing the knowledge base here in India. And that's very important. Therefore, this kind of a model would be called an SPV, but the SPV kind of models you can use in many different scenarios. This is just an example.